There aren't just bad people that commit genocide, we are all capable of it. It's our evolutionary history. Normally, things are viewed in these little segmented boxes. There's classical, and then there's jazz, romantic, and then there's baroque. I find that very dissatisfying. I was trying to find the thread that connects one type of music, one type of musician, to another, and to follow that thread in some kind of natural, evolutionary way. These machines are going to reflect our species and our evolutionary process. Everything we are will end up in these artificially intelligent machines no matter what we do. What is the evolutionary value of blushing? It seems not to be to our advantage to do it, to involuntarily reveal our inner emotions. If we're trying to manipulate or lie, actions in furtherance of individual goals as opposed to the goals of others, blushing would not seem to be helpful. And yet everyone blushes, except the psychopath. That short sleeping that we're now suffering is a consequence of our lifestyle. It's not a consequence of evolutionary habituation. I'm an advocate of evolutionary, not revolutionary, changes. We are glorious accidents of an unpredictable process with no drive to complexity, not the expected results of evolutionary principles that yearn to produce a creature capable of understanding the mode of its own necessary construction. The explanatory power of evolutionary psychology is limitless. Each one of us decides to incarnate upon this planet at a particular point in time and space. We have chosen to come here to learn a particular lesson that will advance us upon our spiritual, evolutionary pathway. The evolution of sex is the hardest problem in evolutionary biology. Britain, relative to the US, is a highly secular society. Philanthropy alone cannot fill the gap left by government cutbacks, and the sources of altruism go deep into our evolutionary past. To rightly recognize that men and women are equal under the law is perfectly removed from the fact that men and women are distinguishable beings that have been shaped by sex-specific evolutionary challenges. Accordingly, there is no reason to assume or expect that there should be equal representation of the two sexes across all contexts. Human nature is not totally fixed, but on any realistic scale, evolutionary processes are much too slow to affect it. One of the most distinctive evolutionary features of human beings is our unusually long, protected childhood. Through the evolutionary process, those who are able to engage in social cooperation of various sorts do better in survival and reproduction. I was taught over and over again that the accumulation of random mutations led to evolutionary change, led to new species. I believed it until I looked for evidence. There may be an evolutionary advantage for schizophrenia genes during famine. Evolutionary psychology offers a parsimonious framework for understanding which domains are likely to yield sex differences and, if so, in which direction. What evolution tells us is that we are part of a grand, dynamic, and ever-changing fabric of life that covers our planet. Even to a person of faith, in fact especially to a person of faith, an understanding of the evolutionary process should only deepen their appreciation of the scope and wisdom of the Creator's work. Most students are presented only with the evolutionary belief system in their schools, and they are censored from hearing challenges to it. Let our young people understand science correctly and hear both sides of the origins issue and then evaluate them. Beautiful people are always with us, as evolutionary psychologists and a trip to the newsstand confirm. It is a matter of common knowledge among mystics that the evolutionary career of mankind is indissolubly bound up with the divine hierarchies, who rule the planets and the signs of the zodiac, and that the passage of the sun and the planets through the 12 signs of the zodiac marks man's progress in time and in space. If sleep does not provide a remarkable set of benefits, then it's the biggest mistake the evolutionary process has ever made. By failing to read or listen to poets, society dooms itself to inferior modes of articulation, those of the politician, the salesman, or the charlatan. In other words, it forfeits its own evolutionary potential. At a minimum, in explaining evolutionary pathways through time, the constraints imposed by history rise to equal prominence with the immediate advantages of adaptation. From an evolutionary standpoint, human consciousness has not been around very long. A little light just went on after 4.5 billion years. How often does that happen? Maybe it is quite rare. I am a believer in the evolutionary process, and yet I have sympathy for the friends of mine who are creationists. I don't find the positions incompatible. I believe greatness is an evolutionary process that changes and evolves era to era. Modern architecture needed to be part of an evolutionary, not a revolutionary, process. Design is a series of creative choices, it's a collaborative effort, an evolutionary process. You choose your fabrics depending upon what you want to say, then you work with mills to get those fabrics. Through the process, you realize what you want it to be. Under no stretch of imagination can war be regarded as an ethical process, yet war, force, terror, and propaganda were the evolutionary means employed to weld the German people into a tribal whole. What an odd time to be a fundamentalist about adaptation and natural selection, when each major subdiscipline of evolutionary biology has been discovering other mechanisms as adjuncts to selection's centrality. One of the things I say is from an evolutionary point of view. Probably the ideal rich environment for a baby includes more mud, livestock, and relatives than most of us could tolerate nowadays. For humans, gift-giving is a universal ritual laden with evolutionary implications. Most of them are doomed to rapid extinction, but a few may make evolutionary inventions, such as physiological, ecological, or behavioral innovations that give these species improved competitive potential. When I went to high school in Australia, I was exposed to textbooks that outlined evolutionary ideas, such as ape-like creatures turning into people. I recognized the conflict between evolutionary ideas and a literal reading of the Book of Genesis. Religion is the best antidote to the individualism of the consumer age. The idea that society can do without it flies in the face of history and, now, evolutionary biology. The more we learn about life, the less plausible is any evolutionary theory that relies on blind, undirected, piece-by-piece change. Racism is essentially natural, it's old-fashioned, it's an evolutionary phase that we're going through. Ultimately it won't exist. It has actually been suggested that warfare may have been the principal evolutionary pressure that created the huge gap between the human brain and that of our closest living relatives, the anthropoid apes. Whole groups of hominids with inferior brains could not win wars and were therefore exterminated. A designer is an emerging synthesis of artist, inventor, mechanic, objective economist and evolutionary strategist. Storytelling is a very old human skill that gives us an evolutionary advantage. If you can tell young people how you kill an emu, act it out in song or dance, or that Uncle George was eaten by a croc over there, don't go there to swim, then those young people don't have to find out by trial and error. I believe that architecture, as anything else in life, is evolutionary. Ideas evolve, they don't come from outer space and crash into the drawing board. There is indeed the possibility that the evolutionary process has, in gray antiquity, bred into us an excess of aggression. We can continue to try and clean up the gutters all over the world and spend all of our resources looking at just the dirty spots and trying to make them clean. Or we can lift our eyes up and look into the skies and move forward in an evolutionary way. All evolutionary biologists know that variation itself is nature's only irreducible essence. I had to place myself amidst the variation. Visit a typical science classroom and you will discover far more than empirical facts being taught. The dominant worldview among scientific intellectuals is evolutionary naturalism, which holds that humans are essentially biochemical machines. Mother Nature has been the best bioengineer in history. Why not harness the evolutionary process to design proteins? Check your testosterone levels. Every study on evolutionary psychology has correlated testosterone levels with dominance. I think it's in our nature to try to get beyond that next horizon. I think that when we, as a species, are scratching that itch, we're actually following an evolutionary compulsion that is wired into us. I think good things come of it. Visit our website for more quotes, quoting.com.